Have you ever been in a situation where you thought you knew everything? I mean, like, really knew what was going on? But then something happens, something unexpected, and suddenly you realize you've been completely wrong about everything. Well, that's exactly what happened to a man who thought he was better than everyone else. Today, we're diving into a story about a rich businessman who had it all and a fast food worker who had nothing. At least, that's what the rich man thought. What happens next will completely shock you. You might even find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about success, about life, and even about people in general. Stick with me until the end because I promise you won't believe the secret the fast food worker was hiding. But before we get there, let me set the stage for you. It's a typical afternoon. The city is alive with noise, the honking of horns, the bustling crowds, the flashing lights of expensive cars speeding past. There's a sharp contrast in the world around us. High-end shops filled with luxury, the glow of golden mansions in the distance, and yet, in the middle of all of this, there's a small fast food joint, a humble little place where most people just grab a quick bite. It's nothing fancy, nothing glamorous. It's the kind of place you would pass by without a second thought. But little did anyone know, the fast food worker behind the counter wasn't just some ordinary person. No, this was someone who would soon leave the world of high society in complete disbelief. Enter the rich man. This man, let's call him John, had everything he could possibly want: money, power, influence. To him, life was simple. He was the type of guy who would roll up to the finest restaurants, snap his fingers, and get the best seat in the house. If someone didn't recognize his status, they were just another nobody in his eyes. He looked down on people, especially those who worked in places like fast food joints. He never thought twice about it because, to him, their lives didn't matter. But that was before he met Mark. Mark was a quiet, hardworking man, someone who always wore a smile despite the grueling hours of work at the fast food place. He wasn't flashy, and he didn't care about making a scene. But he had something that John would soon learn to regret. One day, John, feeling a little cocky as usual, strolled into the fast food place to grab a quick meal. As he entered, he looked around at the shabby decor, the old plastic chairs, and the long line of customers waiting for their orders. He snickered under his breath. It was the kind of place he usually scoffed at, but today was different. Today, he had a point to prove. He sauntered up to the counter where Mark was working, his eyes scanning the worker with an air of superiority. John made a joke at the expense of the place, laughing loudly, clearly trying to show off to anyone within earshot. "I can't believe I'm eating here," he said mockingly. "What's next? Are you going to serve me a gourmet meal on a napkin?" Mark, without skipping a beat, gave a slight smile, nodded politely, and took the order without reacting to the jab. To the casual observer, it looked like just another day at work for Mark, nothing special. But that wasn't the case. In fact, in that very moment, Mark was silently watching, observing every little detail about John. And what happened next would change everything. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like a classic story where the rich guy gets his comeuppance, right? Well, hold on, because this story isn't about a simple revenge plot. This is where it gets interesting and where things get real. John paid for his food, still chuckling, and went to sit down, assuming the fast food worker had no idea who he was or how out of place he seemed in this environment. But Mark wasn't just any worker. As the day went on, John noticed something strange. Mark wasn't just doing his job, he was observing people. He was engaged in conversations, offering advice to customers, and doing something more than just serving food. It was as if he was the one who knew the true secrets of life, and not the other way around. John, intrigued by the odd vibe Mark was giving off, decided to stick around for a little longer. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something about this guy he didn't quite understand. And just when John thought he'd had enough, Mark dropped a bombshell that would leave him utterly speechless. But here's the twist, the real mystery. Mark wasn't just a fast food worker. He wasn't just some guy who had a part-time job to make ends meet. In fact, Mark had been quietly watching John and knew more about him than John could ever imagine. What he revealed that day would leave John reeling, questioning everything about his life, his career, and his values. The secret that Mark had been hiding? Well, You'll have to stick around until the end to find out because trust me, this is one story you won't want to miss. So, stay with me. Let's unravel this mystery together. As you watch, think about your own life. How often do we judge others without really understanding their story? How often do we look down on people without realizing that they might be hiding something far more incredible than we could ever imagine? The world is full of secrets, secrets that could change everything you think you know. Now, before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever judged someone by their appearance? Or perhaps by their job, their clothes, or the way they talk? I know I've been guilty of it before. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that some people are more important than others, that the person in the luxury car is worth more than the person working behind a counter. But what if everything we've been taught about success and value is completely wrong? What if the truth is more complicated than we think? As we continue this story, I want you to keep these questions in the back of your mind. Because when you finally learn Mark's secret, you'll see just how deep the lesson goes. You'll realize that life isn't about money, status, or power. It's about something much more important, something that transcends all of that. The truth, when it comes out, will shake you to your core. So, make sure you're ready for what's coming next, because what happens after this moment will change everything you thought you knew about success, wealth, and happiness. Stay tuned. This is just the beginning. As the days passed, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His usual routine had always been predictable, comfortable, and easy to navigate. He'd built his empire from the ground up, always one step ahead of everyone else. He knew the stock market like the back of his hand, could negotiate deals with the best of them, and was always the first to spot trends before they became mainstream. His life was a well-oiled machine, each gear perfectly in place. But after that strange encounter with Mark, everything felt out of alignment. It was as if someone had slightly tilted his world, just enough to make him second-guess everything he thought he knew. At first, John tried to brush it off. It was just a weird moment, right? People like Mark were just there to do their jobs. They didn't have anything significant to offer beyond a smile and a polite thank you. But the more John thought about it, the more he realized that Mark wasn't like the other fast food workers he'd encountered. There was something unsettling about the way Mark interacted with people. It wasn't just that he was polite or efficient. It was the way he seemed to be always observing, always paying attention to every detail. John had seen it all before. The small-town worker who acted humble, played the part, and seemed content with a simple life. But Mark didn't fit that mold. Not at all. John's curiosity began to gnaw at him, and soon enough, he found himself walking back into the same fast food joint, even though he didn't need to. It wasn't about the food. It was about Mark. He needed to figure out who this guy really was and why he had such an unsettling effect on him. And when he returned, it was almost as if Mark had been expecting him. The moment John walked through the door, Mark greeted him with that same calm, almost knowing smile. It was the kind of smile that made John feel as though he were a character in someone else's story, one where the plot hadn't yet been revealed. "Back again?" Mark asked, his voice smooth, almost too smooth.
He didn't sound surprised.
There was no forced politeness, no awkward small talk. It was as if he already knew why John had come back. John, caught off guard by the remark, muttered something about needing a quick snack. But deep down, he wasn't there for food. He was there because he couldn't stop thinking about Mark. Something didn't add up, and he had to figure it out. The next few days passed in a blur. John kept going back, visiting the same fast food place, sitting in the same spot, and watching Mark as if trying to catch him in some kind of act. He even started asking around, casually bringing up Mark's name in conversation with people who worked at other places in town. But everyone spoke of him the same way, always polite, always doing his job. No one knew anything out of the ordinary. Nothing stood out. It made John's frustration grow even more. Was Mark really just another cog in the wheel, or was there something more? Was he playing a part? And if so, who was the real Mark? Then, one afternoon, something happened that made John feel as though he was on the verge of uncovering something big. He was sitting at his usual table when he noticed a man enter the restaurant, a man he didn't recognize. He was dressed in a sharply tailored suit, the kind of suit that screamed high society. John watched the man carefully, but his attention was immediately drawn back to Mark, who had greeted the newcomer with an unexpected familiarity. It was subtle, but John could see it in the way they exchanged a quick, almost conspiratorial glance. Mark, the quiet, humble fast food worker, seemed to be in cahoots with this wealthy stranger. The man didn't order food. Instead, he sat down at the counter, where Mark handed him a sealed envelope. The exchange was quick, barely noticeable, but it was enough to make John's heart race. What was going on here? John had always been a step ahead of everyone, but this was a puzzle he couldn't figure out. Why was Mark handing out envelopes to wealthy strangers in the middle of a fast food joint? And more importantly, why didn't anyone seem to notice? Was Mark secretly involved in something bigger? Was he running some kind of underground operation, playing both sides, pretending to be a lowly worker while orchestrating something far more complex? The next few days became an obsession for John. He returned to the fast food place with renewed determination, but Mark seemed to be even more elusive now. Every time John tried to approach him, Mark would deflect, casually changing the subject or offering him his food with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The tension between them was palpable, and it was beginning to unsettle John in a way he wasn't used to. Mark had always been calm, collected, almost annoyingly so. But now there was an underlying sense of tension, a feeling that Mark was no longer the man John thought he knew. Was Mark hiding something? Or was John simply projecting his own doubts and insecurities onto someone who was nothing more than a figure in his mind? It wasn't just the strange exchange with the suited man that had John rattled. Over the past few days, he'd noticed other peculiarities. For instance, there was the time he overheard Mark talking to a regular customer, someone who was no stranger to John, someone who was rumored to have ties to the local elite. Mark had been speaking to him in a way that seemed to go beyond typical small talk. The conversation was almost too intimate, too personal. And then, there was the odd behavior of the other fast food workers. They didn't seem to look Mark in the eye the way they did each other. There was something strange about their dynamic, a quiet, unspoken understanding that seemed to set Mark apart from everyone else. No one seemed to want to talk about it, but John noticed it nonetheless. But still, there was no concrete evidence, no smoking gun to point to. Mark's behavior, though strange, wasn't enough to incriminate him in anything illegal. Maybe he was just a quiet guy who had learned how to navigate the world without drawing attention. Maybe John was simply overthinking it all. The thought gnawed at him. What if this was just a case of his own overactive imagination? What if he was making something out of nothing? But then, everything changed again, and the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. It was a Thursday afternoon when it happened. John arrived at the fast food joint for what he expected to be another uneventful lunch. As usual, he sat at his corner table, his eyes scanning the room, looking for any signs of Mark's mysterious behavior. But this time, there was something different. There was a sense of urgency in the air, a tension that John hadn't felt before. It was almost as if something was about to happen, something big. And when Mark finally came over to his table, the look on his face said it all. Mark didn't smile this time. There was no politeness, no pretending. He looked at John, his eyes narrowing slightly, as though he were weighing something. And in that moment, John knew that Mark had been waiting for him to figure it out. "You're still curious, aren't you?" Mark asked, his voice low and steady. There was no hostility in his tone, just a quiet acknowledgement that John had gotten closer to the truth. The tension in the room was thick. For the first time, John felt a sense of fear that he was about to uncover something that would change everything. Mark leaned in slightly, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. What happened next? Well, that's a secret you'll have to wait to uncover. But I'll tell you this. John wasn't ready for the truth, and neither were you. As the days dragged on, John couldn't shake the feeling that he was slowly spiraling deeper into a rabbit hole he didn't fully understand. Mark's words still echoed in his mind, and though he had made no attempt to follow up on them directly, the air in the fast food joint now felt charged with something dark, something he couldn't put his finger on. But it wasn't just Mark's cryptic warning that had John on edge. There were other forces at play now, forces he couldn't ignore. People he knew, people close to him, were suddenly becoming part of this tangled web he had inadvertently walked into. And just when he thought he had a grip on the situation, everything seemed to slip further out of his control. It was late on a Friday night when John's world took another unexpected turn. He had just wrapped up a business meeting that had left him feeling restless and unsettled, so he decided to grab a drink to clear his mind. He didn't need anything fancy, just a quiet bar where he could sit alone and think. He chose one of his usual spots, a dive bar not far from his office, the kind of place where people didn't ask too many questions. He wasn't in the mood for company, just a place to sit in solitude, to let the noise of the world fade out. But when he walked in, he noticed someone who immediately stood out, someone who made his heart skip a beat. It was Claire, his sister. She was sitting at the bar, nursing a glass of wine, looking unusually tense. John had always known Claire to be the composed one, the person who had her life in perfect order. But tonight, she looked anything but calm. Her eyes were narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't noticed him yet, but as John took a few steps closer, he noticed something strange. She wasn't alone. Sitting beside her, in the dim light, was none other than the man from the fast food joint, the one who had come in wearing the sharp suit, the one who had exchanged the envelope with Mark. John's stomach churned as the pieces began to click into place. What in the world was Claire doing with him? Before he could decide whether to confront her or back out quietly, Claire turned toward him. Her face softened when she saw him, but there was an unmistakable tension in her expression. She smiled faintly, trying to mask whatever it was she had been discussing with the man. "John," she greeted him, her voice light, though her eyes betrayed a sense of urgency. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Claire," John replied, his voice careful, though his mind was racing. His gaze flicked toward the man who had yet to acknowledge his presence. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone sharper than he intended. He could feel a knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't right. Something wasn't adding up. Why was she meeting with him? The man finally turned his head toward John, offering him a courteous nod, though there was no warmth behind it. His eyes were cold, calculating. He gave a small smile, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, the type that made John instinctively distrust him. There was a certain power in the man's presence, a power that seemed to wrap itself around the room like an invisible fog. This wasn't just some random encounter. There was something bigger going on here. Claire glanced at the man briefly before looking back at John. Her posture stiffened, and she seemed to hesitate before speaking. "John, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Mark." Her voice dropped lower, and the mention of his name sent a chill through John. How did Claire know about Mark? She had no reason to be involved in his strange investigation, or at least he thought she didn't. "I've been talking to some people, doing some research," Claire continued, choosing her words carefully as if weighing the consequences of every sentence. "There's a lot more to this than you think, John. I've been getting messages. Not just from Mark, but from others too. People who are connected to him and she faltered, glancing around the room as though expecting someone to overhear. "Messages?" John repeated, his heart starting to race. What was she talking about? Was she in some kind of trouble? What did she know that he didn't? Claire looked down at her glass, her fingers tracing the rim, avoiding his gaze. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, uncertain. "John, there's something you don't understand. It's bigger than what you're seeing. Mark's not just some random worker. He's connected to a lot of people who have power, influence. You think he's just some lowly fast food employee, but he's not. He's involved in something dangerous. And I think they're trying to get to you." The words hit John like a punch to the gut. He felt dizzy, his thoughts spiraling. Claire was involved in this mess now. She was always the level-headed one, the one who could see things from a mile away, the one who knew how to handle herself. But now, she was telling him that Mark, of all people, was connected to a shadowy world of danger and intrigue. And worse yet, somehow it was tied to him, to his life. The weight of the realization hit him hard. Whatever this was, it wasn't just some personal issue between him and Mark. It had gotten much deeper, much darker, and Claire was now an unwilling participant in whatever was unfolding. John began, but he was interrupted by the man at the bar. "You shouldn't be involved in this, John," the man said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "It's bigger than you think, and your sister is already in too deep." His words dripped with a quiet menace that made John's blood run cold. "You should walk away. You're not prepared for what's coming." John felt his pulse quicken, his mind spinning with 1,000 questions. Who was this man? How did he know about Claire? What did Mark have to do with all of this? The pieces of the puzzle were coming together in a way that made no sense, and every time John thought he had a grasp on the situation, more questions emerged. With a forced smile, the man stood up, pushing his chair back with a slow, deliberate motion. "We'll be in touch," he said, and with that, he turned and left, leaving John and Claire in stunned silence. John stared at his sister, his mind racing. What the hell is going on, Claire? What did that man mean by "we'll be in touch"? What's happening? But Claire didn't respond immediately. She simply stared down at her glass, the weight of the situation clearly sinking in. "I didn't want to get you involved in this, John," she finally whispered, her voice tight with tension. "But I don't know who else to turn to. Mark, he's not who you think he is. And neither is the man who just walked out. They're all connected, and somehow, it's all tied back to you." John felt a chill crawl up his spine. There was no going back now. The mystery was growing more complex by the minute, and now it wasn't just about Mark and his secrets. It was about Claire's safety, his own, and the deep, shadowy forces that seemed to be pulling the strings from behind the scenes. And the more John tried to uncover the truth, the deeper he was sucked into the web of lies and deceit. Everyone had something to hide. Everyone had their own agenda. And with each passing moment, the stakes grew higher. Would John be able to find the answers before it was too late? Or was he already too far gone? Just when John thought he had finally gotten a handle on the chaos surrounding Mark, Claire, and the strange figures lurking in the shadows, everything came crashing down. The pieces of the puzzle that he had so carefully gathered over the past weeks began to shift, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that had been placed in the wrong spots, revealing an entirely different picture. It wasn't just the man in the suit, or the mysterious messages, or even the unease he felt about Mark's true nature. It was something deeper, something that had been staring him in the face all along, but he had been too blind to see it. The moment it clicked, John felt the ground beneath him tremble. He had trusted the wrong people, relied on the wrong clues, and now, everything he thought he knew was about to be turned upside down. It all began late one evening, when John received a message that seemed so out of place, it sent a chill through his spine. It was a text from an unknown number, no name, no context, just a single line of cryptic text. "You're looking at the wrong person, John. Look closer." That was it. No other explanation. No further details. Just a simple, haunting message that sent waves of doubt crashing over him. John had already felt like something wasn't right, but now, this message added fuel to the fire. It had to mean something, right? It couldn't just be a random text. He sat at his desk, staring at the words for what felt like an eternity, his mind racing with possibilities. Who could have sent it? What did it mean? Who was he supposed to be looking at? He couldn't ignore it anymore. The tension, the unease, everything pointed to the fact that Mark, Claire, and the mysterious man in the suit weren't the true source of the mystery. There was someone else, someone who had been hidden in plain sight. Someone who had been playing him the entire time. And the more John thought about it, the more obvious it became. The clue was right there in front of him, buried beneath everything else. It was Claire. It wasn't until John returned to his sister's apartment the next day that he began to piece it all together. Claire had always been the rock in their family, the one who had everything under control, who never let anything slip through the cracks. But now, looking back at all the times she had seemed distant, evasive, or reluctant to share details, John couldn't ignore the signs. Something was wrong, and it had always been her. She had known more than she let on. She had been involved in something far deeper than she had ever admitted. And worse, she had been keeping secrets from him. When John confronted her that afternoon, The truth finally started to unravel, but not in the way he expected. Claire was sitting on the couch when John entered, her eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. She looked tired, worn down, like a person who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. When she saw him, she tried to put on a brave face, but it didn't fool him for a second. He could see the panic in her eyes, the way her hand trembled as she reached for the glass of water on the coffee table. There was something she hadn't told him, something that could explain everything. And it wasn't just about Mark or the mysterious man in the suit. It was about their entire family. "John," Claire began, her voice shaking, "I've been trying to protect you from all of this, but I can't do it anymore. You have to know the truth." She paused, taking a deep breath as if gathering the strength to reveal something that had been buried for far too long. "You're not who you think you are. None of us are." John blinked in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Everything you've believed about your life, about this family, it's all a lie. Mark, the man in the suit, they're all connected."
But so am I.
"And so are you." Claire's voice cracked as she spoke, and John felt a cold rush of fear wash over him. She wasn't making any sense. What was she saying? "I don't understand," John said, his voice trembling. "What does that mean? What lie?" Claire stood up, pacing in a way that suggested she was trying to make sense of her own thoughts. "The truth is, Mark didn't just show up out of nowhere. He's been watching us for years. You and me. And it's not just him. There's an entire network of people you wouldn't even believe, who have been monitoring our family. They've been waiting for the right moment to make their move." John felt a wave of nausea hit him. His mind struggled to process the words. "What do you mean? Who is they? Why are they watching us?" Claire stopped pacing and turned to face him, her eyes filled with a deep, haunted fear. "Because, John, you're not really my brother. You were never supposed to be born." The words hit John like a slap in the face. He could barely comprehend them, let alone respond. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "What are you saying?" he whispered, barely able to breathe. Claire's face crumpled with guilt as she walked toward him, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want you to know. I never wanted you to find out, but you deserve the truth. Mark, he knows who you really are. You've been part of something much bigger, John. A plan that's been in motion long before you were born. The people watching us, they're not just after money or power. They want control. And they've been using me to get closer to you." John's legs buckled, and he collapsed onto the couch, his mind spinning out of control. None of it made sense. How could any of this be real? How could his entire life have been part of some elaborate scheme? And if he wasn't who he thought he was, then who was he? The truth was slowly sinking in. His entire world, everything he had known about himself, was a lie. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just some family secret. It was much worse. There were powerful people involved, people who would stop at nothing to control him. Mark had been watching him all along, but now he wasn't just a stranger or a random fast food worker. He was a part of something much darker, much more dangerous. Suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle that had seemed like disconnected fragments were starting to form a picture. A picture of a man who wasn't just an ordinary fast food worker, but someone with far-reaching influence and power. But even worse, the truth about John's identity, his real identity, was something that no one could have predicted. And just when John thought he had finally figured it all out, the ground beneath him shifted again, revealing an even darker truth. The game was far from over, and the people controlling it had no intention of letting him, or Claire, go. And now, John had to decide, was he ready to fight for the truth, even if it meant losing everything he thought he knew about himself? Or was he just a pawn in a much larger game? John's mind was reeling, the weight of Claire's revelation sinking in like a stone in his gut. He couldn't breathe. Every moment felt like a betrayal, like his entire life had been carefully sculpted by forces far beyond his understanding, forces that had manipulated him, pulled his strings, and shaped him into something he wasn't. How could he have not seen it? How could he have trusted the wrong people for so long? The walls around him felt like they were closing in, and with every passing second, The reality of what he had been told gnawed at him. Was he truly not her brother? Was he not even who he thought he was? The world as he knew it had shattered, and the only thing left in its place was a gaping, endless void. But before he could even try to process the sheer magnitude of his situation, the phone on his desk buzzed. One message, from an unknown number, a message that made his blood run cold. "You're running out of time, John. The choice is yours. Your life for the truth." No name, no signature, just another cryptic message that sent a chill down his spine. His thumb hovered over the screen, his heart hammering in his chest. What was it trying to tell him? What choice was it talking about? He couldn't understand. He couldn't even begin to make sense of it all. John slammed his phone down in frustration, pacing back and forth in his apartment. He couldn't escape the feeling that someone was watching him, always just one step ahead, pulling the strings, setting traps, forcing him into corners he couldn't see. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that the only way out, if there even was one, was buried in the truth. But at what cost? What would it cost him to truly uncover everything? And what would it cost to expose the lies that had defined his life up until now? His mind returned to Claire, to the sister he had always known as his closest confidant, the one person he thought he could rely on. But now, with everything that had been revealed, he felt like a fool. She had known all along. She had kept him in the dark, and worse yet, she had been a part of it. There was no denying it. She had hidden the truth from him. And the worst part? She seemed to be involved in something far more dangerous than just some family secret. There were people out there who wanted him and her dead. And the more John thought about it, the more he realized that whatever this was, it wasn't just some family issue. It was a conspiracy, something that reached far beyond their small world, into a realm of power and corruption that he couldn't even fathom. The clock was ticking. John had to make a decision. He had no choice but to confront Claire, to demand answers, to make her tell him everything. But he also knew that doing so could put her in even more danger. She had already warned him about the people who were after them, the shadowy figures who had been watching their every move. The people who wanted him for reasons he still couldn't fully understand. The stakes were so high now, he wasn't sure if there was any way out without losing everything in the process. It was a terrifying thought, facing his own sister, someone he trusted more than anyone, and accusing her of being part of a web of deceit and danger that could destroy both of their lives. But he couldn't just sit back and wait for the next message, the next clue to appear. He had to act. He had to take control before someone else did. And if that meant confronting Claire, if it meant breaking through the walls she had built around herself, then so be it. John didn't wait for the right moment. He grabbed his coat and stormed out of his apartment, his mind set on one thing: finding Claire. He knew where she'd be. She was always at her favorite cafe in the early evenings, working on her laptop, trying to hold onto some semblance of normalcy in a life that had been anything but. He didn't even think about the consequences. He had to know the truth. The truth about why she had kept him in the dark, about what she was involved in, and what the hell was really going on. When he walked into the cafe, he spotted her immediately. She was sitting at a table near the window, staring at her laptop screen, oblivious to his presence. Her fingers were flying over the keyboard, but there was something different about the way she was typing, something frantic, almost desperate. John hesitated for a moment, standing just inside the door, before he took a deep breath and made his way toward her. He was so angry, so confused, but he had to keep his composure. For both their sakes. "Claire," he said, his voice steady but tinged with the emotion he couldn't suppress. She looked up, her eyes widening slightly when she saw him. "John," she said softly, a hint of surprise in her voice. But her eyes flickered, and John could see the hesitation there. She knew why he was here. "What's wrong?" John didn't waste any time. "I know, Claire. I know everything." Her face went pale, her lips parting as if to say something, but the words caught in her throat. She looked at him like a deer caught in headlights. "What are you talking about? You've been lying to me. You've been part of this all along, and I want to know why." His voice was sharp now, almost desperate. "What the hell is going on? Who are these people? Why are they after us? And why didn't you tell me? Claire stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor, her face a mixture of guilt and fear. John, I never wanted you to be involved in any of this. I've been trying to protect you, to keep you safe. But you don't understand. She lowered her voice, looking around nervously, like someone might be listening in. This isn't just about us. There are bigger forces at play here. People who would stop at nothing to get what they want. And you, your life, your identity, are part of that. John felt a cold wave of dread wash over him. What do you mean? What am I part of? I can't explain everything right now, she said, her voice cracking. But there's no time. They're coming for us, John. They know you're getting close to the truth. They know we're running out of time. And if you don't do something, she paused, taking a shaky breath. You'll lose everything. The fear in her voice hit John like a punch to the chest. What are you saying? He asked, his heart racing. What do you want me to do? Claire looked at him, her eyes pleading, but she didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, one that looked familiar, the same kind of envelope Mark had handed to him weeks ago. She slid it across the table to him, her hands trembling. They gave me this, she whispered. And now, they're giving you an ultimatum. You have to choose, John. Your safety or the truth. John stared at the envelope, his mind spinning. The choice was impossible. There was no right answer. If he took the safety option, he might live to see another day, but at the cost of all the secrets that had been hidden from him. If he chose the truth, there was no telling what would happen to him or Claire. He could walk away from this, but at what cost? And if he didn't act now, it might all be over. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, suffocating him. There was no easy way out. There was no simple choice. The only thing he knew for sure was that his life would never be the same again. The truth was a double-edged sword, and no matter which way he turned, he was bound to get cut. And so, John stood at the edge of his fate, staring at the envelope, knowing that whatever decision he made would change everything. The clock was ticking. The pressure was unbearable. But the truth was just beyond reach, and the only way to find it was to face his worst fear, to trust someone he no longer knew if he could trust at all. John could feel the weight of the envelope in his hand, its edges sharp, like the thin line between safety and the unknown. Claire's warning echoed in his ears, louder than his own thoughts. They're coming for us, John. They know you're getting close to the truth. They know we're running out of time. Every word she spoke seemed to weigh a ton. He wanted to throw the envelope aside, walk away from this nightmare, but he couldn't. He couldn't erase the gnawing feeling in his stomach that something far worse was unfolding right before his eyes. The truth, as it always seemed to be, was buried too deep, hidden behind layers of lies, and with each revelation, the danger grew more real, more immediate. He hadn't realized until now just how deep the rabbit hole went. The man in the suit, the cryptic messages, Mark's sudden appearance, it was all a small piece of something larger, something so monstrous that it had to involve more people than he could imagine. Mark wasn't the only one watching him. He wasn't even the most dangerous player in this twisted game. There were others, many others, hidden in plain sight, pulling the strings from the shadows. And John had been walking straight into their trap, like a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. As he stood there, staring down at the envelope, Claire's eyes filled with desperation. John, you have to choose now. This isn't just about us anymore. This is bigger than anything we ever imagined. John's pulse quickened. He could feel the walls closing in, the oppressive pressure of the unknown bearing down on him. The fact that Claire, the person he had always trusted most, was involved in this was one thing. But the deeper he dug, the more it became clear that there were far more people entangled in this mess than he could have ever guessed. His entire life, his very identity, was now a weapon in a larger, much darker conspiracy. He had no choice but to face the brutal reality of it. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the cafe door broke his spiraling thoughts. Claire's expression shifted from panic to something darker, something John had never seen in her before. It was as if she'd just recognized something, someone, and her entire demeanor changed. She froze, eyes wide with terror. And then she looked at him, shaking her head ever so slightly, as if trying to warn him without saying a word. But it was too late. The door opened, and in walked a figure John didn't expect, a face he had seen many times before, someone who had been there all along, someone he never thought would be involved in this twisted game. It was Mark. But this time, he wasn't the quiet, nervous fast food worker.
No.
He walked in with a confident stride of someone who had nothing to hide, nothing to fear. And as he locked eyes with John, the cold smile on his lips sent a shockwave through him. "You didn't really think it was just the two of us, did you?" Mark's voice was smooth, calm, and far too collected. His gaze shifted to Claire, who now looked more pale than ever, a mix of guilt and fear. But it wasn't just fear, it was something worse. Claire's hand trembled as she reached for her phone, but Mark was quicker. He slammed his hand down on the table, his fingers gripping the edge with unexpected force. "No more games, Claire. No more lies," Mark said. "John needs to understand the truth now. It's time." John felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. He couldn't process it. Why was Mark here? How could he be connected to this mess? The man who had seemed like nothing more than a fast food worker had suddenly transformed into someone far more dangerous, someone with power, with control. It was all starting to crumble around him, and the pieces were falling into place faster than he could catch them. "John," Claire whispered, her voice shaking, "I never wanted you to be a part of this. I never thought it would come to this. But now," she broke off, eyes wide with regret. "Mark wasn't just watching us.
He's part of this whole thing.
He's one of them." John's stomach churned. "One of who? What do you mean, one of them?" His voice rose in frustration, the panic beginning to claw at him. "Who are they? What the hell is going on?" Mark stepped forward, his presence now more ominous than ever. "They've been watching you, John. They've been watching all of us for years. It's not just about your family. It's about control, power, manipulation. And you've been a key piece in their game, all along." Claire's face twisted with anguish. "We didn't have a choice, John. I didn't have a choice. They promised me that if I helped them, they would leave you out of it, that they would protect you from everything they've been doing. But it's too late now. They already know. They already know everything." John's head spun. It was like someone had ripped the ground out from beneath him. Everything he thought he knew about his life was a lie. His family, his friends, the very people he trusted, they were all pawns in some twisted game, a game that had been playing out behind the scenes for years. But now it was too late to turn back. The truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. "You don't get it, do you, John?" Mark's voice was sharp, his smile fading into something darker. "You were never meant to be part of this world, but now you're here, and you're the one thing they want. You're the key."
The key.
The words echoed in John's mind, and the pieces began to come together in ways he didn't want to see. The conspiracy wasn't just about his family. It was about him, about who he was and what he represented. But even more terrifying was the realization that everyone he had trusted, everyone he had leaned on, had been playing their part in this vast, twisted scheme. Even Claire. "Mark." John's voice was barely a whisper now, a chill running down his spine. "What are you talking about? What do you want from me?" Mark stepped back, his eyes glinting with cold determination. "What I want doesn't matter anymore. You've already made your choice. The only question left is, are you ready to play the game?" Suddenly, the cafe door slammed open again, and John's heart skipped a beat. A group of men, dressed in black suits, entered with a quiet, unsettling authority. Their eyes scanned the room, and for a brief moment, John thought he might be able to make a run for it. But before he could even think about escaping, the leader of the group locked eyes with him. "John," the man said, his voice low and menacing. "We've been waiting for you." John felt a cold sweat break out over his skin as the walls around him seemed to close in. The truth was uglier than he could have ever imagined, and the game had only just begun. His life was no longer his own. Every move, every decision he made from this point on, would be part of something far bigger, something he couldn't control. There was no escaping now. The conspiracy had already consumed him, and the only thing left to do was figure out how far he was willing to go to survive it. The door shut behind the men, and John felt the air grow heavy, suffocating him as Mark's cold eyes met his once again. "You wanted the truth, John. Welcome to it." And as the lights flickered, he realized there was no going back. John's mind was spinning as he stood there, trapped in the center of the cafe, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. The men in suits, the dark energy in the room, and Mark's chilling smile, it all pointed to one terrifying truth. He was a pawn in a much larger game, and now there was no way out. As the leader of the suited men stepped forward, his cold gaze locking with John's, it was as if time had slowed. His every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape, but deep down, he knew it was futile. No matter where he went, they would find him. They had been watching him, waiting for this moment. And now it had arrived. "We've been expecting you, John," the leader said, his voice low and almost too calm. His eyes, devoid of any warmth, stared through him. "It's time to finish this." John's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to show fear. His mind raced, searching for some way to break free, some escape he hadn't yet seen. His gaze shifted to Claire, who stood frozen beside him, the guilt and fear in her eyes more intense than ever. He had trusted her with everything. And yet, here they were in the very heart of the conspiracy, with no clear way out. Suddenly, the leader's voice broke the silence. "You were never supposed to find out, John. Your role was always to be the key to everything, the final piece that would unlock everything they've been working for. But your stubbornness, your need for truth, it made you a problem." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The leader's words, who was they? What was this grand plan? John didn't know anymore. All he knew was that his life, the very essence of who he was about to be torn apart. But then, something shifted in his mind. The pieces that had once felt disjointed, fragmented, suddenly began to fall into place, one by one. "No," John said, his voice shaking with both fear and determination. "You're wrong.
You don't get to control me.
You don't get to decide my fate." A cruel smile spread across the leader's face. "Fate? You've never had a choice, John. You've always been the one we needed. The only question was when you'd finally figure it out." Suddenly, a sharp, frantic voice cut through the tension. It was Claire. "John, please don't do this." Her voice cracked, a mix of desperation and regret flooding her words. "They'll kill us both. You don't know what they're capable of. It's too late." But John's resolve hardened. He turned to her, his eyes piercing through the confusion and hurt. "I trusted you, Claire. I trusted you with everything. You knew all along. How could you let this happen?" The leader raised a hand, signaling his men to step back. The tension was unbearable, the air so thick it felt suffocating. "You don't have time for this," he said, his voice growing colder. "The decision has been made. The game is over." John felt his pulse racing, but one thought burned through his mind like fire. He couldn't let it end like this. He couldn't let them win. They thought they had control over him, over everything. But John wasn't going to play their game anymore. The truth, as ugly and dangerous as it was, had been revealed, and now he had a choice. A final choice. He could stand there and let them take everything, or he could fight for whatever was left of his life. For the truth. In that moment, he realized something he hadn't noticed before. A subtle flicker in the leader's eyes, a crack in his cold facade. This wasn't just about control. There was more at play here, something even darker, something deeper. The conspiracy, the lies, they all pointed to something John hadn't considered. A single name that had always lingered on the edges of his memories but had never come into focus. His father. John's father had been involved in this. He had been at the center of it all. Everything he'd known about his family, about his past, had been manipulated from the very start. His father wasn't the man John had always believed him to be. He was part of the very conspiracy that had orchestrated his entire life. John's voice was steady now, the adrenaline coursing through him, making everything feel sharp, focused. You think you've won. You think you have control over me, over Claire, but you've made one mistake. You didn't expect me to know the truth. The leader's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? John took a deep breath. It's my father, isn't it? He's the one behind all of this. He's the one who put this plan into motion. He's the one who made sure I would be part of this. The leader froze, his expression faltering for a moment, just a split second. But it was enough. John saw it, the tiny crack in the otherwise impenetrable armor. And that was all he needed. He could feel the weight of the truth in his chest now, like a surge of power that burned away the fear. The leader tried to recover, but it was too late. The game had changed. But then, Claire did something that John never saw coming. She stepped forward, her face pale, her expression hollow. John, no. You don't understand. She reached for him, her voice trembling as she spoke. Your father was never supposed to be part of this. He was a victim too. They made him, they manipulated him just like they did with you. He didn't have a choice. John's heart stopped. The room spun around him as the truth, the full, terrifying truth, crashed over him like a wave. Everything he thought he knew, was a lie. His father wasn't the villain he had believed him to be. He had been a part of the same conspiracy, a victim of the very same forces that had been controlling John's life all along. The leader's cruel smile returned. You've finally figured it out, haven't you? The game isn't just about you or your father. It's about control. It's about breaking people. People like you. John's mind was reeling, but in that moment, something snapped inside him. He couldn't stand there anymore, couldn't let these people continue to control him, to play with his life like it was a chess game. With a swift motion, he grabbed the envelope, the key to everything, and tore it open. Inside, there was a single photograph, a photograph that made John's blood run cold. It was a picture of him as a child, sitting at a table with his father. But there was something wrong with the photo. His father wasn't smiling. He wasn't the loving man John had remembered. His eyes were cold, empty, and the figure standing behind him, out of focus, was unmistakable. It was the leader of the men in suits. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. John's father had been part of the conspiracy from the beginning. He hadn't been a victim. He had been a willing participant. The man who had raised John had never been who he appeared to be. And now, John had nothing left. No family, no past, just a broken truth. The leader stepped forward again, but John wasn't afraid anymore. He understood now. The conspiracy wasn't just about power or money. It was about breaking people, making them question everything they thought they knew about themselves. And John had finally broken free. He wasn't just a pawn in their game anymore. But just as John's hand closed around the final piece of the evidence, the truth, he heard the unmistakable sound of a gun cocking. The leader's voice was the last thing he heard, cold and final. You've made your choice, John. But now we make ours. And everything went black. When John opened his eyes again, he was lying in a hospital bed, the sterile white light above him flickering faintly, like it was deciding whether to stay on or shut down completely. His body ached. His mind felt like it had been split open and stitched back together, but most of all, there was silence. No sirens, no heavy boots down the hallway, no voices whispering in the dark. Just the slow, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor and the low hum of machines. He blinked a few times, trying to piece together what had happened. Had it all been real? The men in suits, the cafe, the truth about his father. Was that nightmare behind him now? Or was it just starting all over again? He sat up slowly, pain shooting through his side, and it all came rushing back. The photograph. The final confrontation. The gunshot. But somehow he was still alive. Someone had saved him, pulled him out of that place before it was too late. And he knew in his gut who it was.
Claire.
The door creaked open, and there she stood, worn, pale, eyes sunken from sleepless nights, but alive. Her expression was hard to read, a mix of relief and guilt, but before she could speak, John simply nodded. He didn't need her to say it. Somewhere in that tangled web of betrayal and manipulation, she had chosen him in the end. Maybe it didn't undo what she had done. Maybe it didn't excuse all the secrets she had kept, but in that final moment, she had pulled him from the edge. She stepped closer and placed something on the small table next to his bed. It was the envelope, the same one he had ripped open before everything went dark. But this time, it had more than just a photo. Inside were files, documents, names, locations, a paper trail stretching back decades, mapping out the entire conspiracy. It was everything. Everything they had tried to hide. Claire's voice was low, almost broken. She explained that after the shot was fired, there had been chaos. Someone, maybe even someone inside the organization, had intervened. They had turned on the leader, realizing the power had gone too far, that the manipulation had reached a level even they couldn't justify. The man in the suit was gone now, vanished. Whether he was dead or simply hiding in the shadows, no one knew. But the system he had built was beginning to crumble. The files John now held were proof, and if used correctly, they could take the entire operation down from the inside. The days that followed blurred into each other. News headlines began to shift. Anonymous leaks, mysterious resignations, high-profile arrests, whistleblowers coming forward under new protection programs. John watched from the background. Knowing his name would never be public, his face never shown. But his work, the truth he had unearthed, was setting things in motion. He had the option to come forward, to be the face of justice, but he declined. Some part of him had been destroyed in that cafe, and no matter how much good he could do now, he couldn't bring himself to step back into the light.
Not yet.
One evening, months later, John found himself sitting on a park bench, the sun dipping low behind the skyline, bathing the city in gold. The world kept turning, the streets still buzzed with people chasing dreams and fast answers. But he no longer looked at them with the same naive lens. He understood now that sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in truth. He had lived in a world built on carefully crafted illusions, where every move was orchestrated, every connection exploited. And yet, despite all that, he had made it out. Scarred, yes. Forever changed, absolutely. But alive. Claire joined him on the bench, quiet and reflective. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer filled with secrets, but with understanding. She handed him one last envelope, smaller than the rest, worn around the edges. Inside was a single note from his father. It had been hidden in a secure vault, found only after the collapse of the organization. The handwriting was familiar, the words shaky but intentional. His father had known what was happening, known what the organization would do to his son. And in his final act, he had tried to sabotage the very system he helped build. It wasn't redemption, but it was something. A flicker of humanity buried beneath years of betrayal. As John folded the note and slipped it into his coat, he looked out at the city once more. He didn't know what came next, whether the system would rebuild itself under a new name or whether justice would truly prevail. But he had done what he could. He had uncovered the truth, survived the consequences, and now he had the choice to start over. Not as a pawn, not as a target, but as a man who had seen the darkest corners of power and lived to tell the tale. The camera would fade out here if this were a film, the final frame lingering on John's distant gaze as the city lights blinked on one by one, casting a glow over a world still full of questions. And somewhere in that flicker of light and shadow, the audience is left to wonder how much of what we believe is truly ours, and how much was decided long before we ever had a choice. And just like that, the story ends, not with a clean bow tied around every loose end, but with a whisper that maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning.